Good afternoon. My name is Tricia Rothman. I'm a member of the Lunch-Hour Lecture Committee, and my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who is Dr. Katherine Woolf of the Medical School. But before I do, I would just like to mention that on Thursday, there's a lecture entitled The End of Mass Incarceration, the Moral Purpose of Prisons. It's being given by Dr. Jeffrey Howard of Political Science. Dr. Woolf asked me to remind you all that she's in fact a psychologist. Her first degree was in psychology from Goldsmiths College, but she's been here in University College since 2004, and her PhD is from here. She's interested in the performance of medical students and doctors and the factors that influence this. She will have time for a few questions, I think, at the end. So, Dr. Woolf.
Thank you. Thank you. So I hope you can all hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, I'm Kath and welcome to Game of Clones. So I'm going to be talking today about fitting in and belonging and what psychologists call a fundamental motivating force of behaviour, which is that need to belong. And as human beings, we try and fulfill that need by forming interpersonal attachments with people. So bonds, friendships, good personal relationships. And those relationships are extremely important to us. They affect our happiness or how sad we are. They affect our success in our work. They even affect our health. So they're really very, very important to us. But we don't form those bonds at random. Okay, so who are these people that we surround ourselves? So what I'd like you to do now is think of a close friend that you have. So this is probably somebody who you would confide in if you had some kind of problem. And someone who you've been in touch with in the last few days. So that might be text or, you know, Facebook or whatever, or you might have spoken to someone on the phone, or you might have even seen them face to face. Okay, so have you thought of somebody? You got someone in mind? Yeah? Okay. So now, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to count something to yourself on your fingers, all right? So just be ready for that. So what I'd like you to do is, if you and your friend are the same gender, can you stick one of your fingers out? If you're the same nationality, stick another finger out. If you're both the same ethnicity, if you both have the same level of education, so you both have school at 16, or you both have an undergraduate degree, or you both have a postgraduate degree. And if you're both the same religion, and that might include no religion. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do, if that's okay, is please everybody stand up if you can. Okay, so if you still have a fist, can you sit down? Okay, so I think maybe a couple of people sat down. If you only have one finger or your thumb up, can you sit down? So maybe 2 or 3 people. Sit down if you only have 2 fingers up. So quite a few more people sit down now, but still the majority standing. Sit down if you have 3 fingers. So quite a few more people sit down. Sit down if you have 4 fingers up, whichever way you have it. And then there's a few of you standing who still have 5 fingers, and that's absolutely fine. Please sit down. What we've demonstrated there, I've done that exercise with lots and lots of different people all over the country many times, and this is what we always see, is that people tend to be friends with people that they have a lot of things in common with. And that, in sociology, is called homophily. And the reason I've got this picture of flamingos on there is because you can think of homophily as birds of a feather flocking together, so like flamingos. So basically people who are similar on some of these key, often demographic attributes, tend to group together. And that really shapes our social environment and our physical environment as well. And I work in the medical school and I study medical students and doctors, and our medical students and doctors are not exempt from this either. And actually, medical students are a great group for studying things like homophily, social processes in, and I've got a colleague who calls them the lab rats of education research. And that's because they are very, very highly selected to go into an institution, onto a course that is really quite similar wherever in the country you decide to do it. And then if you work in the UK, most medical students will go on and work in the NHS and have really quite well-defined, structured career paths. So they're really good for studying educational processes and sociological processes. They're also really important because, of course, they are our future doctors, and anything that happens to them and that affects them and their well-being and their learning has a direct impact on all of us as their patients. So I don't know if anyone is a medical student here. No. Yeah, great, wonderful. So I'm going to read, yeah, good. Okay, now I'm going to be talking today about ethnicity and ethnic homophily in particular. And ethnic homophily, medical students are very, very good for studying this particular process because medicine is very popular with black and minority ethnic or BME students. So there are around 8,000 new medical students every year, and about a third of those will be from a black and minority ethnic group. The majority will be from Asian backgrounds, especially Indian backgrounds, and there are relatively few black students, so that means African or Caribbean students. And at UCL, we have a great situation where we have about 50% of our medical students are from BME backgrounds. And the other thing that's really good when you're studying, for me, to study ethnicity with medical students is that unlike other courses, there is a cap on the number of overseas students who can study medicine in Britain. And so that means that nearly everyone who studies medicine in the UK qualifies for home fees, so pretty much most of them are British, which is important when you're studying ethnicity because, you know, most of these people are people born, raised, been to school in the UK and so on, and then they're coming to medical school. The other reason why it's very important to study ethnicity in medicine is because there are persistent and robust inequalities in medicine in terms of doctors. So when you look on average at BME medical students and doctors compared to their white colleagues, they do more poorly in exams, in recruitment, in workplace-based assessments, and they're more likely to be sanctioned, to get in trouble with the General Medical Council, so to be struck off. This was an example of a doctor who was struck off. And these inequalities that we see in medicine actually reflect the inequalities that we see elsewhere in higher education, but also in most spheres of our life. So it's a very important phenomenon to study if you are interested, as I am, in fairness and equality. So I've really spent my career studying ethnic differences in medical students and doctors. And the reason that I do this is because these differences exist. They are clearly there, they are robustly there, and we need to challenge them, and we need to change something. We need to change them. And the way that we change them is by understanding why they are there in the first place and what we can do about them. Okay, so when I started, oh, what's happened there? So when I started doing this research back in the eons of time, so like 2004, I was really quite naive, and I thought, you know, what's causing these differences? Let's look at something to do with the students. Let's measure things to do with those students and see if that's what's causing the difference. So I did that, and I measured personality, learning habits. I looked at their previous A-level results, their GCSE results. I asked whether their parents were doctors, whether their parents had degrees, whether they spoke English as a first language, whether their parents spoke English as a first language. Basically everything that I could possibly think of about these students that might explain this ethnic difference. And I found that really none of those things could explain that ethnic difference. Okay, so that made me think, well, okay, it's obviously something else. Now, we know that these ethnic differences are seen in exams that are marked by machine and that are multiple choice, okay? So not essays that are marked by the tutors, but long, long lists of questions where they tick a box and it's fed into a machine and read. So it seems that it's not so much that the examiners themselves are biased, it's something else. So that made me think, okay, let's look at the learning environment in which learning takes place. And so to do this, I started using social network analysis. So what comes into your mind when I say social network? What's the first word that comes into your mind? Facebook, right, yeah, absolutely. And there are gazillions of online social network things. I don't know what half these things are. But there's a lot of them. And that's not the way that I study social networks. Okay, what I do is study the social relationships between them of the sort that existed before the advent of the World Wide Web. So, this is an example of one of the things that I've done. So I got all Year 2 medical students in a lecture theatre like this one, and I handed them out a questionnaire that had basically a list of every single person in their year. Now there's over 300 of students per year, so it was like a massive booklet for these students. And then they basically circled the people that they were friends with. And then from that, you can draw pretty maps, visualise social networks. So in this picture, every blob is a person and every line is a friendship. And everyone always wonders who this person is here. But of course, this person may have lots of friends outside of their year in medical school, okay? This is only measuring the people in their year that they're friends with. But yes, the people who are around that periphery, around the edges, are less well connected. The people who are more closely connected or have more connections generally are in the middle. And the people who are connected to one another tend to be bunched together, closer together, okay? So what you can do, just when you're visualizing these networks, is look and see, you can color those nodes by things that you know about these students, or things that I knew about these students, which I got from their medical school records with their permission. So one of the things I knew is on which campus they were 1 day a week for a teaching session. So they could have been in Archway here at UCL in Bloomsbury, or at the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead. And maybe going on the bus to Archway is a bonding experience, and there are some clusters there, maybe a little bit. The other thing I knew was what gender they were, and I've been very stereotypical in my colours there, but you can see some groupings there. And also, actually, men look a slightly more peripheral. But when you colour it by ethnicity, you can see there's a clear divide there. And these are actually some data from Manchester Medical School. And this is Suzanne Vaughan's work. And she measured the network differently. She said to people, name up to 10 people who are important for your academic success. So they could have said, my mum, whatever. They could have said anyone. And these are little ego nets. And you can see there that, again, those are very ethnically homophilous. Okay, so we found these results, and we thought, what's going on? What do the students think about this? Why is this happening? So I'm going to show you some quotes from some interviews that we did with students. And some of these quotes, I think, I found them quite shocking and sometimes quite offensive. So I'm not trying to shock you or upset you, but I think that we need to know what's going on so that we can address it. Okay, so the first thing is that students definitely recognised this phenomenon that I'd visualised there. So this is a student who says, when you walk into the lecture theatre, on the right-hand side, there were brown people. In front of that, you see the graduates. Behind them, it's the Asian people. So clearly defined places in the lecture theatre where people will sit. And groups had names, and some of these names, I think, were more palatable than others. So the Asian invasion is a very common name, which actually I think is quite pejorative, quite a negative thing to say. There was, in 1 year, a group of London Asians, who are from London, who were called the Rude Boy Massive, which they were a bit embarrassed to tell me that that's what they were called. But it's really interesting because students, pretty much all of them, said that actually being at UCL, where they were mixing with people from different ethnic backgrounds, was really good. It was one of the things they liked about UCL because it was going to help them when they were doctors. Because in medicine, you meet lots of different people and patients from different ethnic origins. So having that experience at medical school would help them do this in the future. So if diversity is so great, then why does homophily happen? Well, the first thing is that it's just easy. So you just stick with what you're comfortable and this, you know, what you know. And this is a well-recognised phenomenon in psychology of intergroup anxiety, where people tend to be anxious at the prospect of mixing with people who are different from themselves, especially different ethnicity, especially white people, which is mainly what the studies are done in. So white people being anxious at interacting with people who are not white. But then also maybe if you're in a minority, there can be anxiety as well, that, you know, if you mix with other people, they might misunderstand you, or they might not understand your culture that well. But also, you think you walk in to the lecture theatre on the first day of medical school, there's over 300 people there. Who on earth do you go and sit next to? What do you do? Well, you know, this guy said, you see a face that's similar to yours, and you think maybe they have the same background as me. You're just going to stick with them. Because ethnicity, this student said, is the first thing that you notice about someone without having talked to them. So obviously it's not always true, but it is quite often easy just to tell what colour skin somebody has, for example. I don't know why that's wobbling there. I'm doing anything. Oh, okay, he's just waved up there. Okay. And then remember I said there are very few black students generally in medicine, and that's the case at UCL as well. And so this black student said that some of her black friends have made it their mission to know the other black people in the lecture theatres. So maybe if you're in a small minority as well, then it's kind of, you know, you want to purposefully try and find people who are similar to you so that you don't feel so alone. Now, of course, this is the boat club, the rowing club. They mostly look white to me, those people. And obviously rowing is a sort of posh activity. And so there's also the role, of course, that clubs and societies can play in establishing homophily. So this is a white student who says, you know, if you look at my friends, it's not a conscious choice or anything. Will probably be of a similar background to myself, so white British. So you like rowing, you've done rowing at school, you get to UCL, you realise, oh, they do rowing here, I'll join the rowing club. And everyone else who joins the rowing club also went to public school and is white and is middle class. And it just kind of happens that your friends end up being like that without you deliberately choosing them in that way. Now, there are obviously benefits of ethnic homophily. It's extremely widespread, it happens everywhere. And it gives people a sense of identity, a sense of common purpose. It can give people psychological and tangible support, so money, or if you're a medical student, what's coming up in the exams is the kind of currency. And that's called bonding capital. And of course, if you are in power, or you've been in power for one of those people, and, you know, everyone is kind of similar to you, then maybe you don't want to share that power, actually, with people who are a bit different from you. You want to hang on to it. And this was a US study of representative national sample that looked at the job offers that people got relating to who their networks were. And people in all white male social networks received 75% more job leads than people with no white males in their network. So, you know, this is the kind of tangible support that we're talking about here. And, you know, this kind of idea that there's a club, a group of people who are going to be successful comes out, or this is a quote from a first-year medical student at a different university from a different study that was done by Heidi Lemp. And he says he's first year, and he's non-white, which is how his ethnicity was reported in the study. He said, people get to places in medicine because of who they know, and I don't appreciate that. And part of the reason that I probably don't appreciate that is because I'll never be part of the old boys network fully, and I think that's because of my ethnic origin. So this is a first-year student feeling that he goes into medicine and he's never going to be able to achieve maybe the heady heights because of his ethnic group, because the old boys club, who are implicitly white, male, upper class or middle class, will hang on to that power. Okay, so remember this study? This is people important to your academic success. You could name anyone, students could name anyone, and some of them named their teachers as important to their academic success, individual teachers. And those students who did had better grades. And the white students were most likely to name a clinical teacher. And so this goes to the networks that there are between students and teachers and how ethnicity can influence those as well. Now, I did some interviews with clinical teachers back in 2006, and this was a white consultant physician who talked about finding it difficult to relate to some of his female Asian students. And I found this quote quite shocking. Some of these sweet little Asian girlies are very hard to get through to. So he couldn't form those kind of relationships with those students, or he found it harder. And we found in that study that we did where we mapped all the networks, we looked at the relationships statistically as well. And we found that people who were closer in the network went on to have more similar exam grades, even when you looked at how similar their previous exam grades were and you took that into account. So in other words, people tended to pull each other up or maybe drag each other down a little bit. In other words, who you know affects what you know in medical school as well. And so if white students are having better relationships with the teachers, know a little bit more, getting a better learning experience, and then they're sharing that preferentially with the other white students, then maybe that can help explain why we see some of these ethnic differences in attainment. Now, the other thing about having separate groups is that stereotypes can arise, like these stereotypes of men and women's brains. Maternal urges and weddings in women. Yes, okay. So, yeah, the more groups are separate, the more you build up a stereotype about the other group, about the out group. So here's an example of a stereotype that was very common that we found in our study about why Asian medical students are there, how they're motivated. So this was a white teacher, again a consultant physician, saying some Asian students, I wonder if they want to do medicine at all or if they're just pressured into it. And this is an Asian student saying, people often think Asian students are going into medicine for the wrong reasons and sometimes make it tougher for them to prove themselves. And she felt this herself. Both her parents were doctors, and she felt that she had to work twice as hard to prove that she was there for the right reasons, i.e. to help people, and not for the wrong reasons, for status, power, because her parents had pushed her into it. So this kind of stereotyping can hinder those relationships, I think, between teachers and students, and potentially between students as well. Okay, so I've talked about some of the benefits of homophily, but some of the downsides of homophily as well, magnifying inequalities that exist already, this kind of feeling of us and them that comes from, and the stereotyping. And so what's the opposite of homophily? Well, heterophily maybe, but you could say it's diversity. So is there any evidence that diversity is a good thing? Well, we found with medical students that we found a correlation between students who had more friends who were of a different ethnic group to themselves, regardless of whatever their own ethnic group was. We found they had better grades, and even after we controlled for how many friends they had generally. It's obviously a correlation, not, we don't know that it's causal. But there's been some work by McKinsey, who are a management consultancy firm. There was a big report looking at internationally how diverse boards of companies were. And companies that had more diverse boards, both in terms of having women on their boards and having BME people on their boards, performed much better. In other words, they made much more money, those companies, than compared to the boards who were basically white men. So, you know, maybe there's some benefit from that at a group level. There's also something quite interesting about people who are called brokers in social network analysis, so who link disparate groups of people. So in this example, they're being red. And we know that brokers tend to get more pay, they get more promotions, they're considered to have better ideas and thought of more positively by their peers. So maybe there's some individual benefits as well to linking disparate groups. Okay, so how can we combat some of these negative things about homophily and reap the benefits of diversity? So you've got in front of you an identity map, which is mine. I'm going to talk you through it. This is me having picked some blackberries, saying, my hands are covered in blackberry juice. This is what I'm doing. So these are some things about me. I am married. I am a sister. I'm a little sister. I have a big sister. I am a mother, and I'm a mother to twins. Those are my little boy and girl there, Art and Kit. I am an atheist, but my dad is Jewish, although a secular Jew, so I have a Jewish name. And I think sometimes, I'm sure once I got a job because my boss thought I was Jewish. So it does, it has impacted on me. I'm English. What do you think that picture there means? I'm a Londoner. I'm white. I spend my life talking about ethnicity. I would self-categorise as white. I'm a scientist, but as you can tell by my wonderful pictures, I also went to art school, so I could consider myself an artist. I've got a narrow boat, and I cycle to work, so those are things that if ever I meet anyone else who's got a narrow boat, then I'm like, oh my God, you've got a narrow boat too, and we can talk about engines breaking down all the time and stuff like that. I would say I'm left-wing. I am a feminist and an anti-racist, and yet I have a subscription to Vogue magazine, which I can do absolutely fine. I can hold those two identities simultaneously. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is on the piece of paper in front of you, just spend a couple of minutes drawing your identity map. And these are, I've put some boxes. You don't have to fill them all. You can add some extras in. And just spend some things writing about your own identity, but make sure you only write things down that you're willing to share with somebody else. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Does anyone need one? You do. And you do. Great. Thank you. Oh, yeah, sure. And up here as well. And up there? Now, I know we do have apparently some people who are watching at home, as they say. So for you, this is what the piece of paper looks like. Okay, so I think most people have written something. So then what I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you, or the people next to you, but don't show them your map yet. And then, just when you look at them, just spend just 30 seconds guessing in your own mind what you think they might have written. And then when you've done that, show your neighbour your map, and just have a little discussion about anything that you have on there that's similar, that's different, anything you have in common, anything you differ on. After this is the last thing. We're nearly finished. Yeah. Okay. I was just worried about time. Yeah. are you okay? Are you able to talk to each other about yours? Yeah. Okay, so in the interest of time, and to make sure that there's the opportunity to ask questions. Okay, brilliant, well done. So it's really great that you were engaged in loads of conversation there. So I don't know if anyone wants to share, you can check with your partner or your neighbour if it's okay to share. Anything that they found out that maybe they weren't expecting or that surprised them a little bit? Or anything they found out? No? Yeah.
So I spoke to my neighbour here, but I realised he was English.
Ah, okay. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so you can't often tell if somebody's English until you start speaking to them. That's wonderful. And you might not have expected that. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Oh, so you've got something in common that you didn't know you had. Same instrument. Okay, wonderful. That's great. Okay, so I won't get lots of feedback from you all now so that you have the chance to ask me questions. But the point of doing that exercise really is to show that people can have multiple identities. Sometimes those identities can conflict with one another. So I can be a feminist and read Vogue magazine. That people don't always conform to stereotypes. So sometimes you can look at somebody and think they're going to be one way, and then when you talk to them, actually you find out they're another way. Sometimes you have more or less in common with somebody than you might realise. So maybe you didn't realise that you both played the same musical instrument. Maybe other of you thought you had more in common with each other, but then you realise actually you didn't. But the key point really is that the more that you find out about somebody as a person, the more you see them as a human being rather than just an example or a stereotype as a group. And we know there's really good evidence that good quality contact between members of different groups can break down barriers. It reduces prejudice. And here's an example of this. So just to say, actually, I'm going to explain this. So this was a quote from a GP who was teaching a medical student. And what happens is the medical student sits in the GP surgery with the GP, maybe for the afternoon or something, and they'll see the patients together, and that will the learning will happen through that. So this is a GP talking about this experience of teaching, a white GP talking about an experience of teaching an Asian medical student. So she says, before the patient came into the surgery, the student and I had a brief chat about who you are, where you come from, what you're up to, what are your interests. And what she found out about this student is that she was a DJ on a local radio station, right, which she wasn't expecting at all. And it totally changed what she thought about this student. She said, suddenly my perception of her changed. And I didn't just see another Indian student. I actually saw this person. And then when the patients came in, it was easy to engage her. So in other words, just spending a couple of minutes, who are you, what's your background, what are you interested in, made all the difference to the learning experience for this student. So just to summarise, the people that we surround ourselves with are very important for our success or our failure, our happiness, our health. But we don't choose those people at random, and we tend to stick to people who are similar to ourselves. But actually, breaching group boundaries is associated with success and reduced prejudice at an individual and a group level. And sharing personal details and actually just physical proximity, proximity, sitting next to somebody in a lecture theatre and having a quick chat with them can engender a bit of a bond. Just sitting next to someone at work or something can make a bit of a difference. So that's important if you are in charge of organising people, if you're a teacher or a manager or something at work. So thank you very much for taking part.
Thank you, Kathleen, very much. I'm afraid we don't have very much time, and although we do have a Slido and Emma can deal with it, but I think we'll take the questions from the floor, if we have any. Yes, we have one here.
I want to draw on my experience shortly as a teacher within the University of London, where many students from a particular ethnic minority I notice who are doing more poorly and who I want to help and with whom I talk tell me that, for instance, their parents are forcing them to study what they don't want to study. And therefore, I wonder about your use of or categorization of stereotypes.
Yeah, sure. So that's a good point. And a lot of people talk to me about this. And I actually went on BBC Asian Network, which I presume is mostly Asian people who listen to that radio station, and had a phone-in about this topic. And people phoned in and said, we push our children to study medicine when they don't want to. So I'm not saying there are no cultural issues there. What I'm saying is that the assumption that your medical student, if you've got a medical student who's sitting at the back of the class and is a bit like this, if they're Asian girl, you might think, woman, you might think, oh, I bet her parents have pushed her to study medicine and she doesn't want to be here. If it's a white man and it's a Thursday morning, you might think, oh, he was probably out drinking last night. You know, I think it's those sorts of assumptions that I want to fight. Not all Asian students have been pushed into studying medicine. The other thing is that we see these ethnic differences in English, history, you know, other subjects that are not those traditional vocational subjects that are popular with BME students. So I'm not sure that that is a sufficient explanation.
Thank you. I think we have one more. It seems not.
Or one from Slido.
But one from Slido.
Hello. This is a question about the term brokers. Are brokers the same as leaders, and what power or responsibility do they have in a social group?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I haven't been asked that before, but I think no is the answer. They're not the same as leaders. Brokers are defined as people who link groups who would not otherwise be connected. And I think the term comes from economics, really, where they can broker deals, as it were. So it might be a person who's got links to two companies and can broker a financial deal between them. But you can use that term socially as well, about brokering any kind of relationship. But they tend to be, they're not necessarily leaders, but they tend to be very powerful because obviously they are the sole route through which information can pass.
One more question there, and then I think we must end.
Did you look at the people who do medical degree as a second degree?
So there are about 10% of students at UCL who do medicine as a second degree, so they're graduates. And I didn't look at them specifically in this. They do tend to cluster together. So there was that example of that student talking about that, graduates sitting at the front of the lecture theatre, and that space was called Graduate City in the lecture theatre. But certainly when I've actually looked at it in the networks, you do see they tend to cluster together.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking Kathleen again for a very interesting lecture.
Thanks.